Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Ramblings of an Old Fart podcast. My name is Craig Warren, and I'm 71 years old. I'm retired. I've been married about 53 years, a father of 9 and grandpa to a bunch. I'm sort of retired. I retired at 65 to provide full-time care for my wife, who's had some serious health issues. But lately I realized I needed something to do to keep my mind active. So why not a podcast? I have a lot of experience. I've definitely done a lot of interesting things in my 50-plus years in the workforce. I definitely have a lot of opinions, so what more would you need? I should mention that I've never been a member of a political party, and I do not intend to do so. My podcasts don't come from a political place, just a factual and common sense place. I wanted to kind of make something a little bit more fun today, maybe. I did a podcast earlier, Lessons from My Dad. Well, this is just kind of another version of that. Today's a lesson from my dad, our little white donkey. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, we lived on a small farm in South Willard in Utah here, not far from the Weber County line. We had cows and horses and chickens and all kinds of stuff. But we normally always had at least 2 or sometimes 3 milk cows. We usually had Holstein cows, and they gave a lot of milk. So we had one of them that we kept for our own use, of course, But then the other ones, once they had a calf, Dad would go to the auction and buy 2 or 3 more baby calves to put with them because they gave us so much milk they could raise 3 or 4 calves pretty easily. Or at least up till they got to the point where we could give them a little powdered milk and some grain and stuff to supplement them. Okay, so one of the cows had just had a calf. And so Dad went to the auction on Friday. I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, the auctions were on Friday. He went there to find some more baby calves. Well, when he returned home later in the afternoon, we all ran out to check and see those new baby calves. That's like we always did. Well, as we approached the truck, something didn't seem right, though, because normally when he comes home with those baby calves, you could hear them bawling, calling out for their mamas. They were all upset. But everything was quiet except you could hear something stirring around in the truck. So we asked Dad, well, did you not buy any calves this time? He said, I got a surprise for you. Come on around here. So we went back, and, this was a 1-ton truck, had a stock bed on it, so you had a gate that just lifted up so you could back up to a chute of some kind and unload or load the animals. So as he lifted up that tailgate a few inches so we could see inside, we were greeted by 2 small donkeys. One was brown and white, and the other one was all white. We asked Dad why in the world he would be buying donkeys. He said, well, I had a friend of mine that he has a little buggy thing that he would pull around at some of the county fairs and parades and stuff like that and give kids a ride. But his horses, he had a couple of ponies, but they got old, and so he was retiring them and wanted either some new little Shetland ponies or donkeys or something. So anyway, Dad contacted him, but he decided he only wanted the one donkey, the little brown and white one. So we kept the little white one. Dad worked with him for a while and got him broke to ride. We already had a little saddle that fit him because we'd already have Shetland pony. But it didn't take too long to find out why they referred to him as jackasses. The biblical proverbial jackass. Because sometimes our little donkey could be a real jackass. The figurative jackass, if you want to know what I mean. I'm not sure whether he had a knack of finding trouble or if it was trouble just found him wherever he was. But everywhere our little donkey was, trouble was not far away. We named him Catastrophe because, bad things happen when he's around, so you just have to know about it. But early on when we first got him, I have to tell you this. Our little donkey was deathly afraid of water, which sounds really crazy, right? But when Dad brought him home, we just put him in a pen. And the pen, the one end of the pen was right next. There was an irrigation ditch that ran right through the end of it. So, no problem. We just throw hay over to him when we did the others, but we knew he had water. But after a couple of days, Dad went up to me. He wasn't eating any hay. He started eating, but then he wasn't eating any hay hardly, and he just looked all gant up. And Dad said, "Well, guy, he looks like he's thirsty, but I mean, there's water right there." But we watched him for a minute. He wouldn't go up to there and drink. And so Dad just got the halter. He said, maybe he's just stupid, and maybe he doesn't understand. So Dad grabbed a halter, put on him, led him up to the ditch, was going to introduce him there to the water, And he wouldn't go. As soon as he got up close to that water, he just started pulling back, and he just would not go near that water. So Dad said, well, I'm just going to have to dump him in there and then get him used to it, I guess. So he kind of led him up to the ditch there and then just got around the side of him, just bull rushed him and just pushed him off into that ditch. But I noticed you'd think he'd just start drinking immediately because he was thirsty. But he just stood there and he was shaking like a leaf. He was just scared out of his mind. I don't know. I just don't understand that. We never did, actually. For a long time, he still wouldn't go up on his own and drink out of that ditch. So we ended up watering out in a bucket every day. But anyway, give you some idea about our little catastrophe. One day, my sister Margene was riding down. She'd been riding around over by our barns and corrals. So she was going to come up to the house and show my mom she was riding. So she comes galloping up that lane. It was a fair distance from there to our house. And she was galloping up that lane. Only problem is, there was an irrigation ditch that ran parallel on the east side of our roadway. And then it turned and went underneath the road at a certain point through a culvert and went on the west side of the road and then turned and went south and parallel to the roadway again. Well, our little donkey was fine seeing the water on the side. But when he got to where that culvert went on the road and he seen water on both sides, he just hit the skids. He stopped, dead stop, and my sister flew right off over his head and landed in the lane there, which had about 4 inches of powdered dirt there, which it might have been a good thing because I think it helped break her fall a little bit. She came up and she was covered with this super fine powdery dirt. She had a couple of scrapes on her arm, but otherwise she was okay. She was cussing that damn donkey. I know that. I don't think she ever even rode him again. She had nothing to do with that crazy donkey. There were a lot more adventures like that with our little white donkey, I have to tell you. But it's time to move on to the lessons learned, or the moral of the story, so to speak. One day, we were down working, and we were up close by the house. Some guy stopped down to talk to Dad. I don't even remember who they were. Some of the other farmers in the area, different things. While they were talking, me and my brother, we were just sitting there playing, doing whatever. We weren't paying a lot of attention to what they were saying, but one of them, I heard him say something, but I wasn't paying attention. I didn't know what it was. But what caught my attention was immediately after his comment, I heard my dad say, well, I guess fellers, don't really matter what color they are, a jackass is still a jackass. Well, that seemed kind of a dumb statement. I'm thinking, Dad, I'm just a kid. I'm like 8 years old, but I know donkeys come in different colors. It just seemed like a really dumb thing to say. But, what the heck, I just went back to playing. Kids have short attention span, right? But shortly after that, Dad caught our little donkey being the figurative jackass again. See, we had some cows out in the pasture. This was late winter, early spring. And we were still feeding our cows, some of our cows, hay out in that part of that pasture area. And so we would feed them in afternoon, 4 o'clock or something. And then we had another 1 or 2 cows that were due to have calves pretty soon. So we would go out just at dark, or just light, while it was still light enough to see a little bit. And we would just check on those cows to make sure if they looked like they were going to be calving during the night, we would move them in, to a pen of some kind. So we got out there and partway down there where we could see the cows, and we were going to go check them. And then Dad stopped the truck real quick, and he said, what in the world is going on here, right? We drove up there, and we could see that none of the cows were up eating. And there's no way they could be done eating at this point. So we stood and watched for a few minutes. We noticed that little white donkey was eating hay. So we thought we'd watch for a minute, and pretty quick, a couple of the cows walked up there and was going to start eating hay. And he seen our little donkey, chased him out of there. One of them ran up there and tried to bite it. The other one, he spun around and tried to kick it, other things like that. So, man, that was it. That was it. Dad said, there ain't no way no $10 donkey is going to cost me a $100 calf. So next Friday, our little donkey went back to the auction. Well, a few months later, this was probably about early to midsummer, we were up at the local service station. I mean, the real deal old service station. Probably most of you have never seen one, but, you know, you pull in to pump gas and you drive across the little hose they had strung across the road there. When you ran over, it would cause air pressure to ring a bell inside, you know. You'd have the attendant come out and he'd ask you what you wanted, and he'd pump your gas for you and wash your windshield and check your oil, whatever like that. So anyway, we were up there, and I think we got gas, but then there was other guys there getting tires fixed and whatever, so Dad stopped. You know, it was a good place for the guys to bullshit for a while. Well, BS, let's keep it clean. As the guys were talking, I think me and my brother talked my dad into getting us soda. The bottle of soda there in the machine was 10 cents. If you took it with you, you had to leave a nickel deposit. But anyway, we were drinking a soda there. And as they were talking, I heard one of the guys say something very degrading about a certain minority. I caught the conversation this time. I knew what they were talking about. Then I heard my dad speak up immediately. Well, you know, fellers, it don't really matter what color they are. Jackass is still a jackass. Well, imagine my surprise when I realized that Dad never had been talking about our little white donkey, or any other donkey for that matter. He was talking about people, figuratively, of course. As I got older and watched how Dad was with people of all kinds, I came to understand what he meant. Growing up, we had a lot of different people come to our house, different races, different whatever. You know, Mom and Dad had good friends that included Native Americans, Hispanic, Japanese, all kinds. I seen a lot of, here's one of the things that really struck me, because I seen a lot of other guys that would come around visit with Dad. Some of them he knew from when he grew up, and a lot of them he knew from the war, you know, that he knew they'd been off to World War II, same as he was, not in the same place. Some of them were in the Korean War, Vietnam War. But the point is, and the thing I noticed was the same. A lot of these guys had intense hatred for, like, the Germans, the Japanese, the Italians, the Koreans, the Vietnamese, or whatever. Dad didn't have that hatred, and that always impressed me. It also taught me a valuable lesson. I wrote a poem a few years back. Well, actually, I never wrote it down. I just had it in my mind, but I sort of forgot most of it. But I remember the first verse. It goes, when I was just a young boy, my daddy told me, son, there's a lot of different people in this world. We're not the only ones. Well, they come in different colors and different shapes and sizes too. But if you look deep down inside, you'll find they're all just like me and you. So don't judge a man by color or by the shape of his eyes. Make your decision based on the good you see inside. Well, I remember hearing a couple years after this experience with our little donkey and stuff, I remember hearing Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech where he said, I have a dream that someday a man will be judged by the content of his character and not by the color of his skin. Well, I realized that what my dad meant basically was the same thing. He just didn't say it near as eloquently as Dr. King did. So I thought maybe what I'd do is conclude here with a little story that I remember my dad always telling me about my great-grandpa. And when I get through the story, you'll understand the relevance here. My great-grandpa, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, had a freight company. He lived in the Ogden, Utah area, and at that time, Ogden was a really big railroad hub. And so he would pick up freight at the railroad yard there and deliver it north up into Idaho or, east up into Wyoming there. Well, as the story goes, on this particular trip, it was in the early fall, and they had a couple of big loads that needed to go up into the Star Valley, Wyoming area, up by where Afton is. So they headed out, said, we better head out early because, winter comes early in that country. So they headed out. Back then with the horses and big freight wagons, it's a lot longer trip than like 4 hours in a car, right? So they really had their work cut out for them. But anyway, after several days, whatever it took, they got up there, but things were already starting to get cold. But by the time they got up there and got the freight unloaded and everything, it was starting to get in the afternoon, so they decided they would spend the night there. They usually have some kind of a boarding house. So anyway, they went down into the local saloon, if you will. Grandpa wasn't a drinking man, but, they had a really nice big stove there when it was a nice place to stay warm, and you could, BS with the other guys and stuff like that. So he was sitting there for a while. Everybody's kind of just casually having conversation, and pretty quick he heard the barkeep yell at this young kid that had been sitting over by the stove. Grandpa assumed that was his son or something. But so he told him he best go out and get some firewood, get it stacked in so that they'd have plenty for the evening. So the little boy, young man, he went out and grabbed an armload of firewood. And, of course, he was going to get several of them, but he just kind of left the door ajar just a little bit, so when he came in with an armload of wood, he could just kick the door with his foot and open it up, and then he would kick the door behind him to close it, and then he'd go stack the firewood, and then he'd do that on his next trip. Well, I think about the last trip that he was going to make, the wind had kind of come up a little bit, so when he came in, he kicked the door, but the wind kept it from going closed. So the wind was blowing in there, and there's this kind of a gruff-looking old cowboy there that hollered at him, said, "Hey, boy, were you raising a barn or something? Don't you know how to close the door?" And the young man said, "Well, sorry, mister, I'll take care of it." So he ran over and closed the door. A few minutes later, the barkeep noticed he got his woods all stacked, and he was sitting over there in the corner, and looked like he'd been crying a little bit. I guess the guy hurt his feelings a little bit. So the barkeep walked over and talked to the old cowboy and said, that boy's an orphan. He didn't have any place to go, so I bunk him up in the back room here, and he takes care of sweeping up at night and bringing in the firewood and helping me unload freight and stuff like that for his keep. But he said, I see over there what you said to him. It kind of upset him. I see it looked like you've been crying a little bit. You probably ought to go apologize to him. Well, the old cowboy, he kind of, hum-hawed around about it. But I guess after a few minutes he thought about it and decided maybe he should go talk to him. So he gets over there and he said, "Hey, boy, I'm kind of sorry I spoke so gruffly to you, He said, it was just kind of cold, and it kind of, you know how it goes sometimes. The young man looked up at him, and he says, well, that's okay, mister. He said, truth is, I was raised in a barn, and now every time I hear a jackass spray, it makes me homesick. Well, that is a true story up to a point, at least. I know my grandpa had the freight company, and I always went there, but the last part might have been an embellishment by my dad, because my dad got into cowboy poetry for a while there, so I can't guarantee the truthfulness of the whole thing, but I thought it was kind of funny and appropriate. Anyway, I'm glad you stuck with me today. I thank you for listening, for joining. I hope you found it entertaining or educational or thought-provoking. Join me next time, won't you? I'm Craig Warren, and this has been Ramblings in an Old Fart Podcast. Good day to you. God bless and keep you.